Hey, what's up YouTube? This is the Big C again with a build guide on Poison Tornado Shot Pathfinder. First of all, I would like to remind you that all of these content guides are generally only there to extrapolate on my written guides, which can be found on poe-vault.com. Now, Poison Tornado Shot. I came across this guide, or this played version of the build, numerous times during last league and this league, and I figured it was time for me to test it for myself. This is because I really like bow builds, and I've generally been priced out of bow builds ever since I had less time to invest into the game, because generally bow builds only work when you invest a absolutely ludicrous amount of money into them, which has never been something I had nor the time nor the interest nor the time to or the interest in, because I needed to test multiple builds per league and I was never in the market to dump a couple mirrors into a single build to make it playable or viable. So Poison TS came on my path because it looked as if I could make it work on a budget whilst still being extremely good to farm currency, blast through maps at an insane speed with an insane efficiency. Obviously, as most of you know, most people have been running this build with a maximum amount of magic find, which I have strayed away from because I think to me that wasn't efficient, because I think I've done things that made it more budget friendly and also in some extent, not in all of them, in some extent more efficient, and probably also more appealing to most of you. So let's hope in the end, after you've played the build, that you will agree with that, but that remains to be seen. Anyhow, the build focuses around the unique item Xerfe's Heart to basically abuse Soul Eater stacks, which gives you a ludicrous amount of attack speed, in order to make it so your Tornado Shot fires off a stupid amount of projectiles in a very short time, meaning you're applying a ton of poisons on enemies, which then, does a lot of damage, because if you have 300 poisons rolling on a monster, you're doing 300 times as much damage as if you were only having one of them. Well, therefore, attack speed is really good on generic poison builds. And skills that can apply multiple poisons per hit are even better. Well, Tornado Shot does that, and Xerfe's gives you the attack speed, so hey, what do you know? Good interaction. On top of that, grabbing some Rampage, grabbing Pathfinder Ascendancy, using double mobility flasks, grabbing a good movement speed pair of boots with the action speed, some onslaught effect. This build is tailored around zooming. As you can see in the background, mapping is a joke, it goes really fast. However, sometimes it doesn't. As you can probably also see in the background, there are some cases where you will get swamped or overrun, or you will play bad and you won't attack and something will off-screen you, or you will bite to an explosion, or it happens. The build is not tailored to withstand those things, and it comes down to kill stuff or be killed. It's not like you're gonna die every map. I very, very conveniently, in a very short amount of time, made it to level 93. If I were to invest more time into the build, which I didn't do because it was my last build of the league and I ended up quitting the league, I would have easily made it to 96, 97 without it being any problem whatsoever. Further than that, well, then you need to play for long sessions without actually making mistakes. I'm not going to say that anyone can do that. I'm not going to say that I can do that, for that matter, probably, but who knows. But yeah, you shouldn't envy, or you shouldn't want to level this build to 100. That's not what it's made for. It's made to make you currency, it's made to go fast, it's made to be really fun, it's made to kill monsters. And it'll do that very well. Another thing I want to touch upon is why this build clicks so well. That's because Poison also kind of, not always, but sometimes has Pathfinder in its name. And the reason why Pathfinder is so good here is because Xerfe's requires you to find a pretty good amount of attributes on most of your gear. And because the build, or a Xerfe's build, or a Xerfe's Poison build more so, requires you to get a certain set of uniques, it's generally really hard to get the attributes you need in order to wear the Xerfe's. Now in our case, a lot of people won't like hearing this, but in our case this was fixed by leaning on a flask to cap resistances, to open suffixes, to get attributes. Now in the path of building, which you can find in the build guide, I have circumvented that to showcase that it is possible. Like if you have really decent gear, you can easily do both. But in my case, because I was on a budget and I didn't want to make it expensive, I actually relied on a bismuth flask, or initially on the distillate, but then I sucked too much to keep up the distillate, but I'll talk about that more later. So I relied on a flask to stay alive, and it's very easy because honestly, you're a Pathfinder and the flask is always up. But that's where Pathfinder becomes really handy. And obviously, because it's the mandatory pick for most poison builds nowadays, the fact that it has that on top of that kind of enables the Surfy strat, which is really nice. Lastly, I want to touch upon the fact that this build is not really made to, be played from the get-go. It's a transition build. You should transition into it. You should probably play something like P-Conk if you do start. Or I'll play any other ranger build and transition into this, or play it as a second character. Make sure you have all your gear. Play some other variation of poison like Caustic Arrow until 70. Swap your gear out and start blasting. That's what I did. But if you want to play it on League Start, you should probably play Poisonous Concoction until like 85, 86, and then do a full swap into Tornado Shot. Anyhow, that's the general gist of the build. Further than that, I don't think there's much to say outside of going over some gear. So first off, there's the bow. The bow is irreplaceable. It's a dark score and it's really, really solid for these kind of builds. You should probably get a good roll because you're never gonna replace it unless you want to dump hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of divines into the build. Unique wise, there's a chest piece which you run for the onslaught effect because you're a Pathfinder, your onslaught flask is always up, or your silver flask is always up, which means this is basically a double effect of onslaught, which is really good. Additionally, it gives you some fizz mitigation while being good armor evasion life-wise, so it's a pretty solid chest piece. Then there's the astronauts, which are insane because first of all, they're easy to get. Second of all, you can get them with +1 to gems, which enables your enlightens. And lastly, it gives you explosions, which really help your clear in scenarios where there's a lot of monsters. And because you want to create scenarios where there are a lot of monsters, because that's when Xerfes really comes off of the ground. Yeah, this is insane and should never be replaced. I was running a Viscose Leash. I think Viscose Leash also is almost impossible to replace just because Rampage is that good if you're killing a lot of monsters. If you can run it into your build, you should probably, do it whenever you can. You could replace this with a Headhunter if you have no budget. I think that might sometimes occasionally be better, but I think in a lot of fringe cases, the Headhunter won't do much and you will be better off just running a Viscose. Then obviously there's the Xerfes Heart, which is a Xerfes Heart, and then there's the Minx Heart. You get a good roll, you catalyze it for the max amount of Fist to Extra Chaos, which is pretty standard in builds like this. Then there's the rare pieces. First of all, there's a helmet. You need to get an Armor ES base. This is important because Armor ES bases can roll both Strength and Intelligence, whereas Armor or Energy Shield bases can either roll respectively Strength or Intelligence, and not both. So unless you can afford not to have either of these attributes on your helmet, which I would be highly surprised about, well then you can run whatever. But I think Armor ES is the safest. You can get both of the attributes here, it's really good. Get one with the Tornado Shot, fires an additional secondary projectile on it, it's really important. Ideally you want to buy a Fractured base with the enchant, but generally they won't be available. They will either be not available, they will be too expensive, or the Fractured attribute will be too low. I made this by spamming Essences of Envy for Chaos resistance. Eventually ended up hitting this helmet I was pretty happy about, and I finished it off with the Implicits. You will need the second tier of Implicit for the mana reservation efficiency, otherwise you only get 7 and that won't be enough. Next up is the Quiver. Pretty easy craft actually. You just buy a Fractured Feathered Arrow Quiver with projectile speed as a Fracture mod, and then spam the most expensive essence you can afford to buy, let's say 250 times. Because hitting the bow attacks fire additional arrow is pretty rare, but the essence is generally pretty cheap. Or in my case, I found the resist, which is also pretty handy, and a damage mod, and then I crafted life to finish it off. Next up is the ring. This is a really good ring, even though it doesn't look like that, but it has a veiled dex int, which is fucking big. And then it has life and 2 good resistances with an open prefix to craft non-channeling skills have -7 to total mana cost, which is mandatory. If you can't find this, you're probably going to need to drop a resistance, and you're going to need to get Dex and Int individually. You can get more of it then, but I mean, I think a hybrid Strength Int or Dex Int or Dex Strength on a ring like this is really, really good. Then there's the boots. So a lot of people use gold worms. I don't, because I think 15% movement speed and 4% action speed is better than the quantity new books give. Let alone the fact that you can get a second resist, 33 dexterity, 85 life, and poisons you deal inflict damage faster. Like, I don't think new books, or what are they called, gold worms, can ever compete with this, ever. Like, I don't think it's close. I think you can do it if you're playing low content and you're trying to farm better gear, maybe. Because obviously this pair of boots was like, I don't know, 1.5 divine, and probably a pair of gold worms will be like 20 KL. So I guess there's a niche case or a fringe case where you would be able to use the gold worms. But I think if you can get double res with an attribute or triple res life 35 MS boots and you can craft the origin blizzards on them, yeah, that's just so much better than the Magic Find boots, and I don't think the Magic Find makes up for that. And then lastly, which is pretty big for the Pathfinder, are flasks. Basically, all of your magic flasks need to have an increased effect roll, either dabblers or alchemists. I think there's a lower one, but I don't know what it's called. You want an attack speed affix, a movement speed affix, and a curse affix. Now, if you go, in my opinion, the ultimate setup would be these 3 flasks. Dying Sun is obviously mandatory because you have 50% flask effect, so you get 3 projectiles from it. As a 4th flask, I think I would recommend a Jade with a resistance suffix to cap your resistances, and the 5th flask would either be a Granite if you want to play more safe, or a Sulfur for more damage with an evasion suffix. That setup will make you more tanky, will make you do more damage, and you would only give up the quantity/rarity from distillate for it. Now, if you are good enough to keep up the distillate so that it is the only flask you have which gives you resistances, then it is always better than running either or any of the other setups. In my case though, when I was playing this build, I was generally coming home from work being tired, or I was playing for long sessions, and I ended up forgetting to press it manually because you can't automate it. And then I died, right? Because obviously I had 50 res, and not having the flask, I would have no capped resistances and I would die. So if you can't keep up the flask by pressing it manually, you just forgo it and you run Jade Sulfur, right? With a resistance suffix. If you can use this flask as your only resistance flask, you should always do it. And then your last flask is, I don't know, you can run a gold flask for more MF, but you could also do the Jade flask. Or the Sulfur flask for more damage. It kind of doesn't matter, but it all comes down to whether or not you are capable of keeping up the distillate by pressing it manually every, I don't know, I think it's like 4 or 5 seconds, which is very doable. But in my case, I ended up sometimes not doing it, and because I relied on it to have, or to cap resistances, that was kind of painful. I do recommend getting a Corrupted Blood Cannot Be Inflicted on you, Jewel, because you're attacking so fast. Yeah, like you can be attacking 200 times a second, 20 times a second, but hitting 200 times a second, which instantly caps your Corrupted Blood stacks and instantly deletes you. I don't think there's much more to say about it, other than, well, if you have any questions, we have an entire team ready at the Discord to help you out. We have a vivid community there that is eager to help people who are trying to learn, who are trying to either learn from guides, who are trying to get questions answered that have nothing to do with guides, but more so with gameplay mechanics or whatever. If you have any questions, hop on the PoE Vault Discord. It's a great place to be around. Anyhow, that being said, I hope you liked the video. If you did, please press the subscribe and the like button, and I will see you guys next time.